In episode 34, Apply Compensating Controls Correctly and Document Convincingly, we start with a promise that matters to both practice and the Payment Card Industry Professional (PCIP) exam. When a primary requirement cannot be met, you can still achieve compliant, durable protection by proposing an alternative that truly meets the original intent and can withstand assessment scrutiny with ease. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard (PCI DSS) allows this path but expects a high bar. The alternative must reduce the same risk to an equal or lower level, operate every day in the real environment, and produce evidence that a stranger can follow without a guided tour. Your role is not to invent clever workarounds. Your role is to frame risk clearly, match control strength to that risk, and package proof so an assessor can reproduce your conclusions step by step. When this is done well, compensating controls feel like measured engineering, not excuses, and they bridge the gap until the primary becomes feasible without leaving customers exposed. Assertions mean little without proof, so pair the design with both quantitative and qualitative evidence that the alternative equals or exceeds the effectiveness of the primary. Quantitative evidence could include measured false negative rates from controlled tests, time to detect and time to respond metrics compared with expected thresholds, or coverage percentages across assets and users that demonstrate the control sees as much or more than the original would. Qualitative evidence may include independent reviews, architecture sign-offs, and attack path walkthroughs that explain why evasion would be harder now than before. Each claim should cite specific artifacts, a policy export, a log excerpt with UTC timestamps, a configuration digest or signature, a report from a simulation run, so the strength you describe is visible in records and not just asserted in prose. The goal is to make the phrase equal or greater a conclusion the reader reaches, not a statement you ask them to accept. Because all engineering choices carry dependencies and failure modes, name them early and place layered safeguards where they will matter most. Dependencies could include the health of a broker service, the integrity of a directory or vault, or the fidelity of a network path that enforces policy decisions at the edge. Failure modes could range from rate limit exhaustion to sensor blindness during maintenance to a vendor outage that disables a key signal. For each one, choose a second line, alternate enforcement at another choke point, cache decisions for a short window, manual approval queues that tighten during degradation, or heightened monitoring that buys time while you repair the front line. Write down how these layers interact and how long each can support safe operation, so the limits are visible before a crisis and not discovered in the middle of one. When layered safeguards are in place and explained, you have shown that gaps are anticipated and covered, which is exactly what a thoughtful assessor hopes to find. Tie the design to a targeted risk analysis that explains, with clear likelihood and impact reasoning, why the alternative delivers equivalent protection for the specific threat in question. Likelihood should reflect real exposure in your environment, reachable from the internet versus internal only, privilege required to initiate, maturity of known exploits, while impact should quantify the potential blast radius in terms that leaders and assessors both understand. The analysis should connect the control's mechanisms to stages of the attack chain, showing how the chance of success declines at each step and how detection pressure rises as an adversary pushes forward. Where uncertainty remains, say so. Then mark how your layers compensate and how residual risk will be reviewed until the primary becomes possible. Risk analysis written this way is not theater. It is the explanation for why this exact alternative makes sense here and now. To prove that day-to-day effectiveness endures, establish metrics, alerts, and review triggers that will spotlight both success and drift over time. Metrics should show coverage and action, percentage of in-scope assets protected by the alternative, number of prevented or detected attempts per interval, mean time to investigate and close exceptions, and a simple pass rate on periodic sampling. Alerts should be tuned to the failure patterns you fear most: a sudden drop in data capture, spikes in denials paired with unusual traffic, missed heartbeats from enforcement points, and routed to teams who can act within defined windows. Review triggers should be tied to change events that alter risk, new vendors, major topology shifts, platform deprecations, so the compensating path is deliberately re-examined when the ground underneath it moves. When these signals are defined and visible, effectiveness stops being a hope and becomes a measured property of the control. Durability also depends on human routine, so document procedures, training, and change control in language busy teams can follow and auditors can recognize. Procedures should describe who does what, when, and with which tools, and they should name the artifacts captured at each step so evidence is produced as a byproduct of work, not as a scramble later. Training should be short and role-specific, teaching operators and approvers how the alternative looks when healthy, how it fails, and how to escalate with the right context so responders can move quickly. Change control should bind modifications to tickets with approvals that cite the compensating design by name, and it should require a quick revalidation step whenever something material changes so the narrative remains truthful. This layer turns an elegant architecture into a living control system where people, not just diagrams, keep the promise. Validation is the hinge between intent and credibility, so capture the steps, samples, and observed outcomes in an assessor-ready packet that reads like a reproducible experiment. The packet should include the requirement intent, the feasibility constraint, the alternative design diagram, the risk analysis summary, the procedure snippets, and the metrics definitions, followed by test records with inputs, timestamps, and results that show the control operating as claimed. Include at least one negative test that proves the alternative blocks what the primary would have blocked, one positive test that proves allowed behavior still succeeds, and one degradation test that shows alerts and safeguards firing when a dependency fails. Use consistent identifiers, UTC time, and short captions that state what each artifact proves, so a reviewer can flip through without guesswork. A packet like this turns a claim into an answer key others can check. Compensating paths are by definition temporary, so set an expiration date, a reapproval process, and the specific conditions that will end the exception once the primary becomes feasible. Expiration should be short enough to force attention, measured in months, not in years, with reminders that escalate as the date nears, and reapproval should require a fresh look at feasibility and residual risk rather than a rubber stamp. Ending conditions should tie to project milestones, a vendor delivering a missing feature, a platform supporting a required factor, a network upgrade landing, and to risk improvements you can measure today. When the primary finally arrives, the decommission plan should move in the opposite direction of the build. Remove layered safeguards that are no longer needed, retire special procedures, and keep the evidence pack as a record of diligence, not as a living obligation. This discipline keeps compensating controls from hardening into accidental policy. Living programs revisit their exceptions, so reassess annually or after material changes, and retire the alternative as soon as the primary becomes possible without guesswork. The reassessment should replay the feasibility constraint, rerun a slimmed validation, and re-estimate residual risk with current metrics, then record a keep or retire decision with owners and dates. If you keep it, reset the expiry and adjust safeguards to reflect observed issues. If you retire it, capture the evidence that the primary now operates and that the compensating artifacts have been archived with appropriate retention. This cadence demonstrates to assessors that compensating paths are not quiet backwaters, but active bridges that you maintain or decommission with intent. Over time, your portfolio of exceptions should shrink, and the ones that remain should read as narrow, well-governed, and visibly earning their keep. 2 practical cautions keep compensating stories credible when pressure mounts. First, avoid bundling multiple unrelated weaknesses under one grand alternative. Controls must map to a single requirement's intent, or you create murky narratives that neither protect well nor pass review cleanly. Second, avoid relying on human vigilance as the main defense where the primary would have relied on automation. Training and procedures can support a control, but they rarely provide equal strength by themselves. If you must include human steps, add automated checks that confirm those steps happened and alerts that fire when they do not, so diligence turns into verifiable outcomes. These cautions sound simple, but they are where many otherwise thoughtful programs stumble, creating exceptions that look persuasive in a meeting and fragile in an assessment. A third caution addresses scope creep, where an alternative that works in one zone is stretched across the enterprise without the conditions that made it safe. Keep your boundaries true. If the compensating path assumes a certain network posture, a specific identity model, or a particular vendor guarantee, do not extend it to places where those assumptions break. When business pressure demands broader use, pause and write a fresh analysis with fresh validation. Reuse the narrative structure, not the conclusions, so safety remains attached to facts. This habit protects your reputation with assessors because it shows you understand that compensating controls are context-dependent tools, not portable slogans. And it protects your customers because it prevents subtle, silent dilution of protection as the environment evolves. To make all of this concrete, imagine a live constraint, where an older administrative portal cannot support the exact multi-factor method the primary requires for a short window. The compensating path might route all admin sessions through a hardened jump system with strong multi-factor, device posture checks, and full session capture, while blocking direct access at the network layer and adding alerting on any attempt to connect around the broker. The packet would include the feasibility note from the platform owner, the design diagram showing the jump path and denies, the metrics that track sessions and failed direct attempts, and test evidence showing that only jump-mediated access succeeds and that attempts to bypass trigger immediate tickets. Expiry would align to the vendor upgrade date with a cushion, and the ROC-aligned narrative would map directly to the identity and access requirements intent. This one-page story, attached to artifacts, is what convincingly documented looks like in practice. Close with the smallest step that proves the habit today. Draft a one-page compensating control narrative for a real constraint you carry right now, using the structure we just walked together. Intent in plain language, feasibility that names dates and owners, design that maps to the same risk, evidence you already have, scope and owners, layers for failure, risk analysis with likelihood and impact, metrics that show life, procedures that keep people aligned, validation steps with timestamps, expiry and reapproval rules, and AOC and ROC alignment lines ready for downstream reporting. Attach at least 3 artifacts you can already export without help, and add one test you will run this week to make the story stronger. When that page reads cleanly and the links open without fuss, you will have transformed a problem into a defendable position, which is the heart of compensating control done right, and the mindset the PCIP exam is training you to carry. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.